Hello and welcome back to the Young Just Us podcast. My name is Roman and I'm doing an issue-by-issue deep dive into the 1998 run of DC Comics' Young Justice. Okay, first of all, I'm so sorry for the lateness of this episode and also for going a little radio silent. Just, sometimes the depression be hitting. But I'm actually moving this podcast posting day to Saturday from now on, officially. I wanted to do a cute, comic book Wednesday kind of thing, but logistically, Saturday will just work a lot better for me and hopefully help me stay a lot more on schedule. I'm also on the West Coast, so what I'm hoping is that I can post on late Friday night, and that'll be Saturday morning for the rest of the country / world. So late Friday night, early Saturday morning will hopefully be the date and time. I'll also make an announcement post on the social medias about this, but just keep in mind from now on it's Young Just Us Saturdays. I hope that's okay with everyone. No other updates besides the fact that I forgot you have to actually set up your ask box on a new Tumblr blog and I hadn't done it, but now I have, so you can send me asks on the podcast Tumblr actually for real now. Okay, alright. Last week, we covered issue 1, in which Robin, Impulse, and Superboy had some nightmares, accidentally annoyed Red Tornado into reactivating, got psychoanalyzed using the Freudian model of the psyche, had another run-in with the DEO, this time meeting Special Agents Donald, Fight, and Ishido Mad, faced a very silly villain, and found the super cycle. Is that good? Is that helpful for you guys if I do a little recap of last week's issue? Let me know. This week, I'm discussing issue 2 of Young Justice. It's another pretty comedic one, so I hope you guys enjoy the episode. The second issue of Young Justice is titled Sheik, Rattle and Roll and was published on August 5th, 1998. We are now on a first Wednesday schedule for Young Justice. Pretty snazzy. This issue was written by Peter David, penciled by Todd Knock, inked by Larry Stucker, colored by Jason Wright, lettered by Ken Lopez, and edited by Eddie Berganza, though in this particular issue he is credited with quote-unquote weeping, which is very funny. I love when they make little jokes with the credits like that. Panel separations were done by Art Studio Digital Chameleon as usual, and Todd Knock, Todd Klein, and Larry Stucker contributed to the cover art, which I will be displaying on screen in the YouTube version of this episode right now, but if you're just listening, don't worry because I will describe it. Robin, Impulse, and Superboy are on the super cycle, surrounded by women in vaguely Middle Eastern garb. Impulse has 3 speed impressions of himself, which is just what I call it when there are multiple drawings of a speedster on page to indicate that they're doing all the things indicated by the various poses in quick succession. Please let me know if there's an actual word for that, oh my god. Impulse is sitting on the side of the cycle, talking to the girls, then posing on the back of it behind Robin, then posing again on the other side. Robin is in the driver's seat, leaning on the handlebars and saying, "It's the bike, chicks, dig the bike." Superboy is sitting in the front with one of the women next to him. The subtitle under the main Young Justice title says Cruises into Action, so the full title reads Young Justice Cruises into Action. Not my favorite cover ever, and I hate when they make Tim be so horribly heterosexual, but what can you do? The synopsis for this issue on DC Universe Infinite reads, the mysterious supercycle sends Robin, Superboy, and Impulse hurtling from one corner of the world to the other in an over-the-top adventure that eventually brings them face-to-face with the evil of Rip Roar, a nasty guy with no use for kids. Not sure if that's totally true. He doesn't specifically say anything about not liking kids, but in this context, I suppose it is true. I'm going to get into the comic now, so feel free to read along, just listen, or watch the YouTube version where you can see select panels I've pulled from this issue. In the first scene, an uncle and his nephew, Ahab, are traversing the desert on camels to complete their annual pilgrimage to their Lord Sheik. Ahab, wondering at the snow in the desert, asks his uncle how long this section has been like this, and his uncle says that it will have been 2,000 years next Ramadan. They reach the home of Sheik Ali Ben Stein, which we see is a palace on a snow-capped mountain, seemingly the source of the blizzard. We are told in narration that tribes all over come to pay homage to the Sheik for permitting them to graze on his fertile land, but unbeknownst to them, a great tragedy is about to occur. First of all, I am not Middle Eastern, nor do I know too much about the countries and cultures in that area, but I'm just gonna bet that this comic issue is not a particularly well-handled depiction. I did a little research, and and apparently snow is somewhat rare, but not completely unusual in deserts, specifically the Sahara and Arabian deserts, so just saying, young Ahab being amazed by snow just seems like a kind of lazy and perhaps incorrect stereotype, like he could have seen snow before this. Second of all, just so we're all on the same page, a sheik, spelled in the comic S-H-E-I-K, but also commonly transliterated as S-H-E-I-K-H, is an Arab leader, in particular the chief or head of an Arab tribe, family, or village. In Arabic, it's essentially an honorific title and literally means elder. It has spiritual and religious connotations, but can also just refer to the patriarch of a ruling family. Third of all, it's time for another 90s pop culture context corner, because the character of Ali Ben Stein, or Steen, I don't know how they want you to say that, like if they want you to just say Stein. It's spelled S-T-Y-N. Probably Stein. Because he's a parody of American political commentator and actual person, Ben Stein. I think they did this banking on the fact that teens would recognize him from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, in which he plays the teacher who is like, anyone? That scene, if you've seen that movie. But that movie also did come out in 1986, so like, it's not the most topical thing ever. I don't know, this kind of seems more of like a joke for the writer and like adults. I don't know. If you were a teenager in 1998 and thought Ben Stein was hilarious, let me know. All I will say about this, so that I won't have to talk about it again later, is that, listen, parodying a Jewish man to be greedy and money hungry, and look, I get that that was literally Ben Stein's thing, like he literally had a show called Win Ben Stein's Money, but still, and also making him a sheik in an Arab country is somehow both anti-Semitic and Islamophobic at the same time. Maybe I'm the friend that's too woke, but yeah, just wild stuff. Also, the title, if you don't know, Sheik, Rattle and Roll, is a reference to the song Sheik, Rattle and Roll by Joe Turner, which was a 50s pop hit. There's a dance and everything, and it goes like, Shake, rattle, and roll. I had to learn it in gym class in 5th grade for some reason. Anyway, now that we're all on the same page, back to the comic. Yes, there's snow, there's a big mountain, Ben Stein is in the palace on the mountain, it's all very strange, and a great tragedy is apparently about to occur. Next we go to the maiden voyage of the Titanic II, which is a $500 million replica of the original doomed ship, which is, of course, now headed right for an iceberg. The wealthy people aboard think it's all part of the experience, and the boat will just miss the iceberg, but we see that it is, in fact, an authentic disaster, and the crew of the ship are panicking. Just as they're about to crash, however, the iceberg is destroyed by the supercycle, which has spawned a giant anti-proton cannon right next to Bart's head. Superboy says it's fine because it's not like Bart was using his head for anything anyway. The cycle is still unaffected by Superboy's TTK, much to his confusion, but Bart says, why shouldn't the cycle ignore your TTK? The rest of us do. And Superboy threatens to push Bart off of the cycle. Robin says they won't need TTK because he's getting the hang of the supercycle. He has an active dialogue going with the console array, and he managed to use the weapon system to destroy the iceberg, so that was on purpose. And he also stopped them from going straight to space at the end of issue 1. Unfortunately, now they're headed straight for the Great Wall of China. Robin has a few near misses and asks Superboy to please catch the people falling off the wall. Superboy doesn't waste time in flirting with a couple of girls he catches, while Impulse vibrates a cushion of air so that the rest of the people float gently down. Robin directs the cycle to get them off the wall, which it does, heading for nuns in a station wagon loaded with explosives. Robin notices the cycle is telling him that a phase-out sequence is armed and ready. Robin thinks he knows what that will do, so he goes ahead with it. The nun says holy, and Robin says ghost, as he and the cycle phase through the non-explosives car. Both he and the cycle are now incorporeal, and the cycle takes Robin underground, and Robin begins to suspect that the cycle is actively looking for something. Don't you just hate it when you are gonna crash into a non-explosives car? I don't know if that's, like, supposed to be a specific reference to something. It kind of feels like it is, but it could also just be like, you know, what's the worst possible thing for Robin to crash into? Nuns in a car filled with explosives. Or if there's like a thing where like people smuggle explosives into China dressed as nuns, and like this is a known thing and I just don't know. I guess that's possible too. But yeah, just some very silly shenanigans here. The Titanic 2 bit is pretty hilarious. It's cool that Tim figures out the cycle so quickly. Makes sense since he's a disciple of Batman. He would naturally be into gadgetry. And seeing Superboy and Impulse work together briefly is pretty cool. The burn about Superboy's TTK from Bart is pretty good. The rest of us ignore it, so why shouldn't the cycle? Yeah, I just honestly don't have that much to say about the section, so let's move on. My cat is in my lap, so if you hear kitty purrs in the background, don't be alarmed. She's like 7.5 pounds and she purrs like a chainsaw. Meanwhile, on the next page, which is literally written out in the caption, the Sheik Ali Ben Stein is drowning in gifts and offerings, and he's obviously out of place here, so we get the impression that something strange might be going on. And sure enough, DEO agents Fight and Mad are there, in questionably offensive versions of their usual black and white suits. Agent Fight tells the Sheik that 3 teen heroes have acquired a bizarre artifact and are heading this way and might bring some trouble with them. Another fourth wall break with Meanwhile on the next page, love to see it. And I do wonder what Fight and Mad are doing there. Like, ostensibly they're making sure Rip Roar doesn't break free, I guess. Or like overseeing Ben Stein somehow. But I do love the gag of them just conveniently showing up everywhere. I also wonder how they knew the boys got the super cycle. Like, who told them that? I mean, they were there at the end of issue 1. But, like, why are they saying that, like, it's, like, news to them? Because that would also mean, like, the timeline is really weird here, because they were definitely there at the dig site at the end of issue 1, and it feels like the boys have been on the cycle joyride for, like, at most a few hours. Maybe that's wrong, like, maybe it's been, like, a day and a half, but how did Fight and Mad get to the Middle East so quickly, then? And because it seems like they've been there for a while. Look, who knows? Comic book logic. In terms of all these costuming choices, I'd really like to talk to someone who is Arab about this representation, because to me it doesn't seem great, but I'd love confirmation. Back to Superboy and Impulse. Superboy is concerned about where Robin is, Impulse not so much. He says, "So he went through stuff. Big deal. I go through stuff all the time." And Superboy replies, "Yeah, like friends." Superboy says Robin could be anywhere by now, and anywhere turns out to be there. The cycle crashes right into Superboy with Robin still in it, and Bart manages to grab on too. Robin asks if Superboy is okay, and he says he's just a little tired. Superboy asks if Robin is going to take the cycle back to the archaeological dig site that they accidentally stole it from, since Robin is such a highly moral leader, and Robin says it's not a bad idea, but he thinks the cycle has found whatever it's been looking for and is now honing in on it. Red Tornado then joins them, flying next to the cycle. Robin asks what he's doing there, and Red Tornado answers that he finds them to be an interesting study in character conflicts, and he also wanted to provide them with some adult guidance. Superboy objects to this, saying, "I'm sick of you talking down to us, Reddy. You're not an adult, you're a vacuum cleaner with attitude." And Red Tornado replies, "Pardon me while my repair circuits attend to my damaged ego." Meanwhile, Impulse has spotted the snow-capped mountain in the middle of the desert that they're headed towards, which also appears to be shaking. Inside the palace, the Sheik has noticed the same thing. The cycle has popped out another gun of some kind, next to Superboy this time rather than Impulse, and begins to shoot a beam at the mountain, which melts the snowcap and causes it to erupt like a volcano. Robin instructs the other two to head down and get people to safety, but Superboy insists he can do it alone, to Robin and Impulse's frustration and annoyance. Superboy says he could divert the lava flow, but that won't stop the rest of the mountain from coming down on the palace, so he flexes his TTK and moves the whole palace out of the way with it. Superboy being concerned about Robin is very sweet. Bart continues to have utmost confidence in Tim, though, which is interesting. The panel of Superboy saying he's just a little tired while stuck like a bug splatter on the front of the super cycle is really funny. I don't really know if he's being sarcastic, like, "Oh yeah, you just hit me with a moving vehicle, but I'm just a little tired," or if he's being completely earnest, like, obviously I'm physically fine, but this whole adventure is just tiring me out because things like this keep happening. I personally interpret it as the latter, which is just funnier to me. More Superboy teasing Robin about being leader, that tracks, and also his burn to Red Tornado about being a vacuum cleaner with an attitude is pretty great. My Superboy as the id theory only gains more evidence by the page, by the way. If you missed last week, there's a whole section where Red Tornado diagnoses them as id, ego, and super ego, Bart, Superboy, and Tim, respectively, and I just really disagree with that personally. I totally stand by my take that Impulse is the ego and Superboy is the id, and this is a great example. When Robin tells him and Impulse to go work together, Superboy rushes ahead because dealing with everything and being the sole hero is what feels good to him. pleasure principle, hello, which guides the id, not the ego. Not to mention him getting completely distracted by all the girls inside of the palace in the next scene. Like, if that's not it, I don't know what is. You know who actually mostly stays on task this whole time? Bart. Bart stays pretty focused. And, oh yeah, we get the Ferris Bueller's Day Off bit here. Sheik Ali Penstein goes, does anyone know why the mountain is shaking? Anyone? This is also probably the best demonstration of Superboy's TTK yet. He has to physically touch the palace so that he can extend his telekinetic field around it, and then he can move the whole thing out of the way instead of, like, if someone tried to do that with just super strength, the building would come apart in chunks, I think. Although sometimes Superman can also move whole buildings without them falling apart, and that's supposed to be explained by, like, also a telekinetic field. Like, I guess the one that they mimicked on Superboy is also a thing that Superman has, but then I'm like, I don't know. Look, I'm trying to make it work, okay? I'm trying to make the lore work. Also, guys, have you noticed how good I am being about not calling Superboy Khan because he's not called Kal-El yet? I'm pretty proud of myself. Okay, next scene. Meanwhile, a giant creature called Rip Roar also breaks free from the mountain, presumably due to the eruption, who says that the gods of New Genesis imprisoned him 2,000 years ago, but now he's finally free. Apparently, he stole one of New Genesis's beloved supercycles for the glory of Apocalypse, which the new gods never found, and now he has the boys, though he calls them Gnats, to thank for his freedom. He says, "Thank you, Gnats." Rip Roar demands his cycle back, which Bart denies, and he goes to fight the boys, but then Red Tornado intervenes. Rip Roar punches him away and goes to yell at the supercycle for not freeing him sooner, and the cycle dumps the boys, whimpering at Rip Roar. Superboy attacks Rip Roar in defense of the cycle, and Bart still objects to the name, though Rip Roar... Sorry, it's really hard to say that. Rip Roar. I always end up saying Rip Roar, like with a W. Though Rip Roar tells them that it is, in fact, actually called the Supercycle. Superboy gloats and says, "Ha, told ya," but Bart replies, "Fine, go believe a supervillain." Rip Roar punches Superboy into the wall of the palace, now displaced from the mountain and just on the ground next to them, thanks to Superboy, and Bart takes over, beginning to throw a lot of sand at Rip Roar, but then Rip Roar creates some ice on the ground because he has control over ice as well as fire, apparently, and Impulse slips on it, and he also goes flying into the palace through a window this time. Both boys have landed in the room full of women that were in the Sheik's entourage, and Red Tornado comes in and suggests they stop getting distracted and get back to the fight. Outside, Rip Roar says that now he'll take the supercycle and go, but Robin wonders if maybe the cycle doesn't want to go with him, having completed its last programmed function. Rip Roar insists that the cycle has imprinted on him and loves him, but Robin plays on his pride to make him agree to let the cycle decide between the two of them. When Superboy and Impulse get back, Robin and Rip Roar are both calling to the cycle, which is between them, like trying to make a dog choose which owner it prefers. Rip Roar offers the cycle endless blood and destruction, while Robin says they'll have great adventures and improve people's lives together if it chooses him. Meanwhile, Agents Fight and Mad are baffled by the whole situation. The cycle then finally chooses Robin to Rip Roar's confusion and dismay. He pleads for it to have been a mistake, but the cycle splats him with oil and exhaust, and Superboy tells him he doesn't think it's a mistake. Rip Roar's responding rage sets off the volcano again, and he seemingly drowns in lava. Robin says he broke free from his captivity, only to discover that ultimately his greatest captor was his own dark nature. And Superboy asks, "Are we gonna have a moral at the end of every adventure?" Robin responds, "There is that possibility, yes. On the other hand, we get to keep the cycle." The Sheik says he owes the boys his life and offers them anything they want, except for his money. Superboy considers, but Impulse seems to immediately know what he wants, but the panel cuts off and the comic ends before we get to see what he asks for. Okay, so Rip Roar is an original character here. This is his first appearance, though he'll pop up a couple more times in YJ-related comics. I think he's in Spy Boy Young Justice, I think, and maybe like the 80-page giant too. Not much to say about him, really, except that his presence is supposed to remind us of the Apocalypse and New Genesis stuff, which, if you don't know, this was the big conflict that DC was building to across series at the time. It's all really complicated and not very compelling, in my opinion, but it will keep coming up in Young Justice, so I'm literally going to just read you a paragraph from the Wikipedia page as a bare-bones explanation. If you want to know more, you can read the rest of the Wikipedia page. This is like sort of the conflict that they were facing in the JLA movies. You know, apparently Joss Whedon kind of messed up, and then Zack Snyder released the Snyder Cut, which was crazy that was real. Like, that was crazy. Anyway, it's sort of about that, but it's different in the comics. Okay, so here we go. Apocalypse and its counterpart, New Genesis, are two planets that were created after the destruction of the Urgrund, the world of the old gods, implied to be the gods of Norse mythology. While New Genesis was given strength and nobility from the living atoms of the old god Balder, Apocalypse was saturated with evil from an unnamed sorceress. The two planets are locked in an eternal war, symbolizing the struggle of evil and good on a grand mythic scale. Apocalypse is ruled by a fell being known as Darkseid, a dark leader who rules over his downtrodden people by force and fear. So yeah, typical comic book stuff, really. But all you need to know is that Apocalypse, bad. People from Apocalypse, bad. Darkseid, really bad. New Genesis and the New Gods, good, mostly. So there you go. Rip-Roar stole one of the New Gods' motorcycles, basically, because Apocalypse and New Genesis literally have eternal beef, but then the New Gods caught Rip-Roar and imprisoned him, but they never found the cycle, which is now in Robin, Superboy, and Impulse's possession. Got it? The cycle was, I guess, unable to free Rip-Roar because it was under all that rock or in a dormant state or something. So when the boys awakened it, it immediately sought out its last task, freeing Rip-Roar, and ostensibly Robin is correct in saying that the amount of time that's passed in combination with fulfilling its last command has essentially freed it from Rip-Roar. Okay? God, I love comics. Sometimes I do hate the lore. Sometimes it's like, do we need to be doing all this? I mean, this isn't even that bad. Like, the Darkseid Apocalypse stuff is pretty understandable. Anyway, him saying thank you, Gnats, to the boys is really funny. Like, at least he's sort of polite, I guess. When Red Tornado tries to fight Rip-Roar, he obviously makes a tornado, and Bart is in the background like, I could have done that, which is really funny. Like, anytime there's any sort of whirlwind or adjacent event, Bart gets kind of jealous because, like, that's his thing. I do wonder if Superboy accidentally naming the supercycle correctly is a complete coincidence. It's certainly played that way in the comic, I think. Like, it's just sort of a joke, but we do know that the cycle can communicate kind of telepathically, so I wonder if it, like, beamed its name into Superboy's subconscious, and he was like, we should call it the Supercycle. By the way, the Supercycle is the equivalent of the Young Justice animated show's Sphere, called Sphere, if you were curious. I guess they thought a supercycle was too silly or too hard to animate. Probably that one. Another thing is when the cycle chooses Robin over Rip-Roar and Robin is praising it like, good cycle, good cycle. Bart rolls his eyes and is like, supercycle, cripes, what's next, the Justice Mobile? Which I just think is interesting because here and in issue 1, Bart's always been the one to be like, we are not the Justice League. And he hates it when people associate them with that. And I wonder why? Like, maybe he just genuinely finds the name Supercycle really cheesy, but that comment about Justice Mobile just intrigued me, so definitely let me know if you guys have any insight. I've read some of the Impulse run, but not all of it, so I could be missing some context there. Yes, Rip-Roar drowns in lava, but, like, don't we as Young Justice know that at this point he definitely has lava powers or whatever and is not dead? Like, they'll just seem quite chill and like, well, there's that problem taken care of. I don't know, it's just kind of weird. Robin's last corny line about Rip-Roar is really funny, and I love the stuff about needing to have a moral at the end of every issue. Like, it's both meta and not, because I'm sure the creative team had some pressure on them to, like, teach kids good morals since their target audience was a little younger. But then also in universe, the boys are also facing that predicament, sort of, in that they need to be good role models for other kids their age and younger. Shockingly, Bart's request from the Sheik will in fact come back. Much later, but it will. I was kind of impressed when that happened. Like, damn, I was positive Peter David forgot about all that. So just keep it in mind, Bart's request. If you could ask for anything from Ben Stein except for his money, what would it be? Drop a comment. And that's the comic, guys. Sorry again for the lateness of this episode, and also for the fact that it was kind of short, although I actually don't know if it was. I have to look how long I've been recording. I'll be honest, this really isn't my favorite issue, which is part of why it took me so long to get this done. It bounces all over the place, and I feel like as a result, this episode kind of bounced all over the place. And then there's also the stereotyping and the racism question mark. A little 0 for 2 in the wokeness department here, but that's kind of what's to be expected with most non-modern comics. It doesn't, like, actually bother me that much. Like, I've watched interviews with Peter David, and he seemed like a great guy. He made Shatterstar and Victor gay, so, like, that's awesome. But yeah, I'm just tracking this stuff in YJ. But I do love this series, and I don't want you guys to think I don't. So yeah, I think that's everything for this week. So definitely let me know your thoughts and feelings on this issue, either via the social media or the email. That's all YJU Podcast, all one word, across all platforms. All links will always be in the description or show notes below. Make sure to subscribe to the pod wherever you're listening, and next week, and remember that's next Saturday, not Wednesday, I will be covering issue 3 of Young Justice, which should be a little more fun. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's not Young Justice, it's Young Just Us.